All right, welcome to another installment of our online weekly Bible study. We've been going through some passages in the Bible talking about idols and idolatry, which has been kind of interesting for me to go through. A lot of times we kind of dismiss the idea of an idol because we think of a little trinket, right? And we don't have trinkets that we bow down to, and so it's not something that we worry ourselves about. But really, the Bible starts off by talking about it from a deeper perspective. We started off in Exodus chapter 20, the beginning of the Ten Commandments. And God spoke these words, saying in verse 2, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of slavery, you to have no other gods before me. That's the foundation for the teaching about idols. It's not, the don't have any graven images comes after that to kind of develop that, but the first one is no other gods. And so the idea we talked about from Ezekiel saying they've turned these idols into their hearts. What are the things in our hearts that we put before God in some way that fills a role that God should have? And so we talked about it from the Old Testament, from the New Testament, because it continues to be an issue. And I think it's something that applies to us today. Although we don't see it maybe as clearly as somebody who in the Old Testament would have a little trinket and they would bow down to it. But I think there are things in our lives. We talked about from Tim Keller's perspective, the list of things that idolatries that he listed that he thinks maybe are problems that we face. Everything from power, approval, comfort, image, control, dependence, independence, depending on which one you could make, different things. So idolatry isn't that we've taken something bad, evil, sin, like that. Idolatry can be good things that are just in the wrong position in our lives, that are in the wrong order, that have taken priority, that should not be a priority. So when we talk about something like power, is it saying that nobody who's a Christian should have our power? I don't believe that's true. But it's to say power shouldn't be something we seek after before we seek God. And even then, our power here is stewardship of the power that God gives us. Most things here, love. When we love other people, we're being good stewards of something that God gave to us to give away. From the beginning, when God talked to Abraham, he said, I'm going to make you a blessing so that you can be a blessing. And so God said, I'm going to bless you and your family so that I can then bless others, all nations, through you. And so when we take things out of order, right, that's when bad things happen. And so it's not necessarily that we've adopted something evil. It's that, so you could say, well, dependence or independence. I need to be dependent upon somebody or my life's not worth living. Or I need to be independent. If I ever need to depend on people, then that's when. And so it depends on who you are, depends on your heart. The position of your heart in relation to how you worship God and what might have a higher priority in your life than worshiping God. And so from that perspective, it's interesting. There's several big ones that we can talk about. Family, we talked about first. Money, again, and this week we'll talk about one more, and that is power. Money is one thing, but money is often used to buy power or fame or other things. So you could wrap up a lot of things in money. Same thing with family. That might be control or other things that come into play. With power, it's a big one. And you think, okay, it's political season, September, almost October, midterms coming up in November. There are a lot of people seeking power right now. And there are a lot of people, if you look at them, will do a lot to get power. In fact, a lot of people who prioritize money will spend an awful lot of money to get a position of power. So you have donations going, you have all of these things, but money can get power and then power can get money back. And so a lot of people make big donations. A lot of people spend their own money to run for an office. You say, oh, they're paying a lot. Well, I don't know if they're just giving that away. Or they think, hey, if I get this position of power, then it would be beneficial to me in the long run. Maybe I'd get some more money back or feed the ego in other ways. So I want us to look at somebody who in the New Testament sought after power, had power, prioritized power above all else, and used that to kind of oppress people and other things. But I want to make the kind of the correlation that you think that it might be only a political thing, because that's where we see it, kind of the most naked ambition for power, right? We see it. We see people who want power, and they're willing to take off the pretend costume that they're not and say, okay, yeah, I am. A lot of them are. But does it exist in the church? I think it does. Does it exist in families? I think it does. Does it exist in communities? I think it does. And so, identifying this is something that we can talk about. We're going to do it by talking about one of the least popular characters in the New Testament, a man by the name of Herod. So we're going to read a passage that you might think about at Christmas time, but we're going to read starting in Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. In Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, it says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, or Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is the one who's been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. And then when Herod, of course, heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling the chief priests and scribes and the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So picture Herod. A lot of times we don't know so much about Herod, but if you go back and read some of the history books of other people during that time, one of the historians of the day was Josephus. He was not necessarily a Christian historian, and so when he saw things that are validated in the Bible, a lot of people give credence to that. And he wrote his history not long after Jesus and the disciples were alive. And so when he confirmed some of these things, okay, well, it's time to start looking about that. But he talked about a lot how evil kind of Herod was, how difficult he could be. We know, for example, one of the big sayings at that time, this is what Josephus reported, was it was better to be one of Herod's pigs than his own sons. It's a big statement. Why? Well, in that time, if you were king and somebody was to ascend to your throne, who would it be? It would be your sons. It's similar to, we talked about, we've just seen the kind of the changeover from Queen Elizabeth to now King Charles III in Britain. But if there were people who wanted power and they were ambitious and you were in the way and you weren't dead yet, they didn't want you to get to be 96 or 94, 95, however old the queen was when she passed away, you could just take care of that yourself. And so it was not uncommon for a son to murder a father who thought they could do it better. And really, the power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so this turnaround was not great. Herod thought, he was maybe a little paranoid too, but he thought that his sons were trying to do that. He actually had executed 3 of his own sons because he thought they were after his throne. What else do we know? He did that. One of his wives, he got angry at her. She wouldn't ascend the throne. He was just having a bad temper. Already, this guy's a bad guy. What are some other things? Well, he wanted, the king would have his nobles. And so when he died, he was afraid that a lot of people wouldn't mourn. Maybe they'd even rejoice. And so he left command that when he died, all the nobles would be killed too. So people would be mourning, not necessarily for him, but he wanted to make sure they were mourning. I'm not laughing because it's absurd. And yet for Herod, this was his life. It was his ambition. It was his God to be powerful, to be king. And that way he became his own God. He thought he was better than God. And so what does he do? It says he was troubled when so you're the CEO of a company. Somebody comes in and says, I want to know more about the next CEO. You go, wait a minute. There's a struggle in situations too. And some churches are more vulnerable to this than others. With the pastor has a lot of control and the pastor's doing well. And somebody comes in, they've picked a nice associate and they think, okay, well, pastor, you're getting a little older and this guy's young and ambitious. Let's go ahead and turn over the reins. And first thing you know, the pastor's fired that person. There are other things out there that are power and control and back and forth between pastors and deacons or elders and all kinds of power play. So we see it in Herod in a kind of a vicious way, but it exists in other places. Somebody has control over something, they want to maintain that. They want power over it because to have power over something is to make sure it stays what you want it to be and doesn't change to something you don't want it to be. And so they've come in and said, hey, where's your replacement? He didn't like that. They said, all Jerusalem with him. Well, Jerusalem was troubled because he was troubled. If he's not in a good mood enough to kill his own children, probably you want him happy. And this troubled him, and so they're troubled too. Well, it says he went to the scribes and the chief priests and other people. And so, but if you fast forward 30 years to when Jesus is older in ministry, why couldn't the Pharisees, who are threatened by Jesus because he's speaking as one who has authority, and they've said they didn't have that, and recognizing that he did, they were recognizing that they didn't. he's come in and said, you ought to serve and not be served. Well, the religious establishment of the day was happy being served and having a position of authority. He says, go in and take the lowest seat. If somebody wants to honor you, they will. They wanted to come in and have the highest seat. Why not just let Jesus be? You say, well, there's no power in the church. Well, okay. Instead of letting Jesus be and letting people go wherever they would, they had him killed. They had him executed. They let the Romans do it, so there wouldn't be necessarily blood on their hands. Although Pilate, recognizing the blood on his hand, try to wash his hands clean of the blood of Jesus. His blood was certainly on their hands. You say, well, we don't want to judge people today based on what their ancestors did. I understand a lot of the problems with anti-Semitism and things like that go back to that moment. The religious establishment of the day wanted to hold Jesus down. They wanted to keep him from having power. They wanted to keep him from having followers. They couldn't do it, so they killed him. It's, why kill Paul? Why kill John the Baptist? Why kill all these people? They were getting power. Not power in the sense that they had a position, but power in the sense of their authenticity led people to want to follow them as a leader. And so, from every point along Jesus' life, people wanted to kill him. Now, we live in a world where killing is awfully bad, so firing suffices, right? But there's still those back and forth. There's still the desire to leave things the way they are for some people. There's a desire among other people to change things. Yeah, it exists. And so what do we say? Well, okay, if God has given us power to use on behalf, we're shepherds on caring for his flock, then there's a legitimate use of power. But if that desire for power usurps the idea that we're being stewards of God's power, right? We want our power, we want to be the best stewards of the power God has given us. That's where it becomes an idol for us. It definitely was for Herod. And so, I think the chief priests and people were trying to help him. Now, the Magi, the wise men were not. They received a different word. And so we left off with, they're wondering where to be born. And so all the people said, in Bethlehem of Judea. I mean, everybody knew the prophecy. So it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. And you have that shepherd analogy there. And so Herod summoned the wise men, secretly ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. They want to know about how old Jesus would be at this time. So they let him know. And now he sent them to Bethlehem. So, okay, go represent me. Now he's being mischievous here. He's being deceitful. And he says, go and search diligently for the child. And when you found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. Well, we know Herod wasn't going to do that. After listening to the king, they went on their way. Behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until they came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And so does the story leave off here? No. What do? Do they go back and tell Herod, Herod's going to kill the young boy? What happens? And of course, if we have been around many churches for many years, we've known at Christmas time the story's been read. Picking up in verse 11, it says, and going to the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. They fell down and worshiped. So here you have people who recognize the kingship of Jesus, the power of Jesus, the one who shepherded his people from far off, from far east. The wise men who were looking, who were aware of these kinds of things, and they don't have any problem worshiping. Jesus didn't himself want power. Remember, they tried to make him king, and he had to sneak out, right? He didn't want to be the king of Israel. He wanted to be the king of kings. Anyway, realizing who they were in the presence of, they opened their treasures, and they offered gifts like gold and frankincense and myrrh. Being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. And Herod, this is several verses later, because he figured out eventually they weren't coming back. It didn't take that long to get to Bethlehem and back. When he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he became furious. So he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem, in all the region that was 2 years and under. So here's the idea. Why 2 years? Well, it took a while for the wise men to come from the east. Then it took a while for them to figure out. He goes and he has those conversations. Hey, where is he going to be born? Bethlehem. Okay, then it takes a while for them to go to Bethlehem, and then it takes a while for him to figure out they didn't come back. How much time was all? It could have been a year, could have been a little more. And so maybe it's just to be safe, he doubles it. I don't know. Why 2 years? So he basically says to his army, And this is vicious, but this is the kind of things that power corrupts. It's corrupted a man's heart where he didn't mind the killing of innocent children. He said, okay, go into every house. If there's a boy 2 years and younger, then go ahead and kill that boy. We don't want any of them to survive. And so it was fulfilled by the prophet in verse 17. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children. That's a symbol because she was the children, the ancestral mother, not their little biological mother, but their great grandmother. And it says she refused to be comforted because they are no more. It does a couple of things, and it leaves an indelible image on a generation, right? Such that in 30 years they're wondering, did Herod succeed in killing the boy? We know that Joseph and Mary received word, and they got out and they went to Egypt. Came back years later when Herod had died. Was Herod successful or not? So when Jesus shows up, how old is this guy? 30. Is he one of the lone men in Israel that had a 30-year-old birthday that year? 31. Because all the other boys of that age were gone. Then who is this man? When John the Baptist pops up, he's not much older, but a little bit, right? And then Jesus. Okay, what is somebody of this generation going to do? In many ways, I think Herod's attempts at offsetting the power of Jesus added to it. We don't get a whole lot of sense of that later, but if you imagine forward, people would have remembered these episodes. And what you see is power made him do something that was antithetical to everything Christian, antithetical to life, antithetical to compassion for children, all the things that we think God would impart to us. But power did it. He neglected other things because of power. So the power had become, for him, his God. And that lasted until his death, apparently. And so what I'm saying is, power, if you understand it in the sense of stewardship, leadership is a stewardship issue, love is a stewardship issue. All of these are great issues under the idea of stewardship. Because God has given us, we then take care of that. When it gets out of that order, right, when it becomes more important than the other things of God, when being a leader, when maintaining power makes us do things that we wouldn't report to Jesus himself, that Jesus would not be proud of us for doing. When it leads us to deceive and to lie and do all of those things, that's when we realize power has gone too far. It's become for us an idol. It's become for us something that came before God. God said, no other gods before me. And there are any number of other things, and power certainly happens to be one of those. So I wanted to look at this one. This one's probably not as in-depth as some of the others that, maybe because Herod, is kind of an easy guy to not like. Are there times people abused their power or made power their idol that were more likable? Well, certainly. But, it showcases the fact that power can do the wrong thing to you. Power in your heart can lead you to a bad place. It can actually take you away from God and can convince you that you're more important, your power. One of the big things we finished not too long ago, the idea of Samson. For Samson, of course, he had this earthly physical power. At some point, he stopped giving credit to God for that power and started assuming it upon himself, such that when people cut his hair, he thought it'd be fine. And he wasn't, because it was God's power that he had that he was steward of, not his own. And when he forgot that led to his downfall. So we certainly don't want our idols to lead to our downfall, but we also don't want to not worship God anymore. So we need to prick our hearts and make sure we're keeping track of them, to make sure the things in our life that are important maintain their role under God, not in front of God. I hope you're doing well. Hope you're enjoying this series so far. Who knows where we'll end up next week, but another area perhaps of idolatry, and we'll look forward to talking about that then. Until then, I look forward to seeing you soon, and God bless you.